Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Firestone Ride-Rite Extreme Duty air helper springs for the rear on a 2013 Ford F-350 Super Duty. And the goal of airbags is to maintain our factory ride height even when it's loaded up. So I've gone ahead and measured from the ground to the top of the wheel wells, and in the rear of our truck we have 43.5 inches and the front is going to be 42.5. So we're going to load up the bed, get this to sag down, and then see if we can't correct that. So to simulate some weight, I'm going to go ahead and load a tote of about 1,000 pounds of water weight, and that's just going to kind of simulate the sag, and then we can see where we're going to be sitting. So with our weight in place, you can see that the truck has already started to sag, and I've gone ahead and done some measurements. So we've actually lost 2 inches in the rear, and the front has actually raised up by 1/4 of an inch, which seems minimal, but that is going to do a lot of stress to our vehicle. Now the issues that's going to cause is the rear is able to hold this. By no means is this stressing out the 350 Super Duty, but the problem is with sag, you're already putting your suspension kind of in a tension state. So it's going to not ride nearly as smooth, and it's also just going to wear out your suspension components as they're already compressed with that weight, and as they move up and down as you go down the road, it's just going to have that extra tension and prematurely wear out your suspension. But a lot of the issues with a sagging vehicle is actually going to be in the front. And if you've ever hauled a heavy load or had something in the back of a truck, you notice that the steering feel kind of gets pretty numb. It starts to get a little bit squirrely and light in the steering wheel, which kind of takes away the feeling of control. And that's because you're not having that solid contact patch on the front. All that weight is pushing that front end up. So not only is it going to cause handling issues, but also braking issues. Since you don't have the weight on the front where your braking is done, it is going to slow that down, and especially already having weight, that adds for a little bit of a precarious situation. Now something else that it does that people don't really think about is raise the headlight height, and that's as it's tilted up, those beams are going to follow suit, and so you're not going to have the light on the road where you need it. You might be blinding other people coming at you, and overall it's just not the safest way to operate. So being able to raise that rear up to level the vehicle out should maintain that nice headlight height, and it's also going to give us that steering feel and braking back, all while protecting our suspension from being overloaded. So with our airbags installed, I've gone ahead and filled them up, and not even all the way, but enough to get our load back to level. And that's going to give us all that steering and braking. And honestly, you're going to notice it going down the road. The rear's just going to feel like it can support that weight a little bit better. So this is a great, easy way to get your ride height leveled out. Now this is what our airbags look like when they're installed, and you can see they just kind of replace where your factory jounce bumper was. And right here in between the bracket, this is the jounce stop, and the jounce bumper is relatively short, so that's where these bags come into play. They're filling up this void, whereas your jounce bumper, it has to rely on dropping all the way down to this point before they start working. So at that point you're kind of already sagging, and that's where the bags, they allow you to fill that up to where your truck never has to sag for those jounce bumpers to work and really get that extra oomph. These you can fill up, adjust accordingly. You can even do it side to side because this is dual path, so that makes it easy. If you have a slightly off-kilter load that's maybe heavier on one side, you can adjust accordingly and get that perfect setting. Now the double convoluted shape of the bags gives you a very heavy duty design, and this actually has a load capacity of 7,500 pounds, which means you're going to be able to handle quite a bit. Now keep in mind that doesn't necessarily bump up the capacity of what your vehicle can handle, but the fact that it can handle 7,500 pounds, if this bed is loaded up, as this is a landscaping truck with a bunch of rock, this is going to be able to support that and give the suspension a fighting chance. Now this is definitely a higher capacity than some of the other bags on the market, and that means that you get to run a little higher PSI in these. Now at minimum, you always want to have 5, and that's going to just kind of protect these from squishing down. So just to kind of give it some body, but you can go all the way up to 150 PSI in these. So if you really are loaded down, maybe stuff in the bed and you have a trailer, or if you're using a fifth wheel or gooseneck, this is a great option. It's going to be able to support a lot of that weight. And again, it's really just going to give our leaf springs and our rest of our factory suspension a fighting chance to really hold up against that and reduce any sag. And the great part too is, as far as installation goes, it's really easy. There's no drilling required. You're really just taking out your factory jounce bumpers and then putting the brackets in place. And you can see it all just bolts around the axle, also around our U-bolts on the leaf springs. So it's really solid. And the fact that you don't have to drill anything, you can get this knocked out definitely within a few hours. And you'll be ready to use your bags. Now, speaking of that, we're going to walk you through the installation to make sure you get yours installed. Now, we've gone ahead and removed our spare tire, and that's just going to give us a little bit more room to work. You don't actually have to, but it does make it a little bit easier just to have a little more space to work through. So if you want to lower yours down, by all means. And really our first step is going to be removing our factory jounce bumper, and there's going to be a nut up top here, and it's going to be a 15 millimeter. Now, if it is seen better days and it's a little rusty, I suggest using a little penetrating oil to knock it loose. And as we start to loosen this up, if there is corrosion, you're going to need to hold on to that jounce bumper, and if it's fighting you a little bit and it's still spinning, you can go ahead and use a pair of channel locks to kind of bite onto the top plate here. This is part of the jounce bumper, so if you pinch onto that, even vice grips, if you have ones that are large enough, will work well. So even now I'm kind of losing my grip a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead, grab my channel locks, and just bite onto this. So with that taken out, you can go ahead and grab that, make sure you have that nut from up top. And then on our driver's side here, if you have a diesel truck, your urea tank is going to be up here, and there's going to be a 13 millimeter bolt on the outside of the frame that just goes through here. We're going to go ahead and remove that bolt. Now, this is not going to be reinstalled, so you can go ahead and do whatever you want with this bolt, because we'll be passing new hardware through here later. Now, with that bolt removed, we're also going to go ahead and remove that threaded clip. So you can use pliers here. I'm going to kind of just use my channel locks to kind of reach behind it and then pry it. Now, if you got part of it coming out there, you can go ahead and use just like a flathead screwdriver and just kind of pry this back, and we should be able to get this to remove. There we go, and if yours breaks like ours did, we're going to go ahead and get that little piece out as well. So now you're going to want to grab your driver's side specific upper bracket, and it's going to look like this, so make sure you have the proper bracket. They are side specific. And we're also going to grab our bolt that looks like this, and we're going to use a flat washer and a nylon lock nuts. Now, in the instruction manual, they have flange nuts, but they say to use the washers if your kit has the nylon. So yours may have the flange nut, they may have the locking nylon like ours. So make sure you have a flat washer ready. And we're going to go ahead and just kind of get this up in place, and where we removed that clip and bolt, we're going to pass this new bolt through. And this should have a gap here to where it's not going to pinch any of the wires. If you are concerned about that, might be a good time to just kind of set them up to where they're not going to be in the way. And do know that the bags are going to be here, so this one in particular is going to be a little bit tricky. We may need to zip tie this out of the way, but just make sure it's not pinching any of the clips as we put this in place. Now, this one is kind of getting in the way, but there is a clip on this bottom side that just slides onto that larger harness. So if you do that, that should get this out of the way and not cause us any problems here. So getting our bracket in place here, we do need to run these two half-inch blocks here, and you can see they are offset. So I'm going to have these, the hole on the outside, and then I've gone ahead and just put our flathead bolt up through there, and we're going to pass that through where our jounce bumper was. Now we're going to try to align this hole, so it might help to have your bolt ready to just kind of pass it through. And what we're looking for is this to sit nice and parallel with the ground, so we want it as flat as possible. So it may be possible that you'll have to run a 1/4 inch spacer as well, but what I'm going to do here is just kind of see where we're sitting. So just kind of drop that bolt down for a second, and then you may need to push these wires out of the way. But we're going to try to get this passed up and push it flat against the frame. And then, as I mentioned before, we'll just take our bolt, make sure that we can get this aligned with that top hole. And that's going to really tell us the story of how much gap we have left to fill, or if we're good. Now, in the instructions, they say that you have to use the 2 1/2-inch, but what I'm finding is that didn't allow this bolt up top to align and have this flat. So you can see as I'm holding this flat, I have about a 1/4 inch gap. So I need to put a 1/4 inch spacer here, and that's really what we're looking for, is having this set to where, again, this is parallel with the ground. So whatever combination works best for you, go ahead and do that, but you just want it filled up here to where there's no gap, and that way when you tighten this up, it's not going to pull the bracket out and be crooked. I'm going to put this back in place with our 1/4 inch spacer and see if that allows us to have everything properly aligned. So just kind of pushing this up, I'll see if I can't get my bolt pass through up top. That's good, and this will cinch up when I tighten it. So I think this is going to be the ticket here. So as far as this, we're going to follow it up with our large flat washer here, and then we're going to go ahead and get a nylon nut put on there as well, and we can kind of get these all just kind of hand tightened on there, and that way it'll hold our bracket in place. And this wiring harness is kind of in the way, so you may just kind of just be patient here. And I got that one started. I'll go ahead and get this top one again finished up with a flat washer and a nylon nut up top. So I'm going to go back. These are going to be 9/16, so with a wrench on the back side, I'm going to just go ahead and kind of get these snug to where they're sitting in place. Now you're going to want to kind of hold this to where it's flat, and don't over tighten it, because you kind of want to even both of them out. But I think the top one here, we get that nice and snug. I can go ahead and come back down, and I'm going to be using an Allen key here. Now I have one that goes on a ratchet that's going to make it a little bit easier, but as long as we hold that in place, we can go ahead and use a ratcheting 9/16 socket to get that one tight. We'll go ahead and get this tightened down. Now the hex that I'm using on the bottom here, it's going to be a 7/32. It's going to be a lot better than holding an Allen key and trying to tighten this all down. So we'll go ahead and get this snugged up, just making sure that we do keep this nice and flat until it's snugged properly. Now we'll grab our airbag, and what we're looking to do is put our air fitting through this middle hole here, not the far one, and then we have our alignment pinholes, and you can see on the top of the bag, this is our pin that needs to be dropped into one of those. So the one that we're looking for is the front. So what we'll do is you can go ahead and just kind of squish the bag to get this in place. We'll align this and make sure, just kind of have a finger on that. You should be able to kind of just slide that, and you'll feel it lock into place, and keep it there. And what I'm going to do is take my tooth washer here, and then we have our large nut. We're going to go ahead and get this threaded on, and that way it holds that in. You don't have to tighten it down all the way, but we want this to kind of stay in position of that alignment pin, because as we put the bracket in, if this rotates, that can really cause some issues for us. So just get this snug to where it's not going to pop out of that alignment hole. Now that we know that's kind of locked into place, we're going to go ahead and get that nut tightened, and it's going to be an 1 1/8" socket here, so pretty big. And we'll just go ahead and make sure that this is snugged down. And that should be good. Now we're going to grab our bottom brackets, and these are not side specific. They're the same on both sides, so you can grab either one. But this one, we're going to just kind of feed in here. This needs to sit on the axle. And then our top bracket is going to go around where our factory jounce stop was, and then this portion is going to go in between our U-bolts on our leaf spring shackle here. So we'll just go ahead and we're going to kind of just align this in place here, and we're just making sure that we kind of have a nice fit. Everything's going to kind of sit properly, and you may kind of have to move some lines here. As you can see, it's a little tight, but what we're looking for is the tabs on the lower axle mount there, you can see, should kind of align. So this actually sits inside of the upper bracket, so it should kind of align like this, and you're going to want to push this against, you can see the back part of our bracket should sit right in between those U-bolts, and this doesn't have to sit in here, but you should be able to at least like lift it, but make sure it's aligned there. But we're really just looking to get this nice and flat, so kind of match it with our top bracket there. And the best way that I've kind of been able to figure that out is just following honestly my leaf springs here, the lines from them, just align that properly and just make sure that this is pushed all the way against your U-bolts. And what we'll do here is I'm going to grab my paint marker and we're going to make just an alignment here because we're going to want to go ahead and tighten this on our bag onto our bracket here, but we want to make sure that we're not twisting it around as we tighten it, otherwise it'll put stress on the bag. So with our brackets kind of in place, and I've just started my hardware here, we have some adjustment on the bottom of our bracket or where our bag is mounting up. So you can see I'm able to kind of shift this side to side, and we don't want to put stress on the bag. Now granted, when it lifts, it is going to change a little bit as it kind of raises this way, but kind of having this as much straight up and down to where the bags don't look like they're pulling like this could prolong the life of the bag and just be healthier for it. So what you should do, make sure that this is pressed against it, you're happy with the alignment there, and then what you'll do is kind of get your bag set where you want, and then I'm going to go ahead and make my alignment here with just a chalk marker, just a line on our bag and bracket. That way we know if it's moved or not, but really mine's just all the way back to align it, so I'm going to go ahead and get this tightened down. Now we can go ahead, raise this up, we can get our bottom bracket out if we need to, and that's going to allow us to get this all tightened down. So you can see here how it sits on our bracket, and that's just going to kind of help me keep this in place. Okay. Now with that tightened down, our alignment's still good, we'll go ahead and get our lower bracket put back in place. So now's a good time, just double check to make sure that our brackets are aligned exactly how we want them, and again that it's pushed back against our U-bolts. And what we'll do now is take our bolt with a flat washer and we're going to just pass it through where the two brackets kind of align with each other, and then follow that up with a flat washer and then the nylon lock nut, and then we're just going to go ahead and repeat for the other three portions where those brackets overlap. And before I get all those tightened down, I'm going to go ahead and get our axle clamp in place. So we're going to be dropping our carriage bolts in, just making sure that they're not going to hit any lines. And then we can go ahead, slide this up. And we're going to be using a flat washer as well as our nylon lock nut on both sides. So I'm just going to get started a little bit here, just hand tight. And then we can go ahead and do the same on the other side. I have that in place. I'm also going to pass my U-bolt here around our other U-bolts of our leaf springs, and we're going to get those put in the slots of the upper ones here, and we're going to want this to be as level as possible. So we'll just slide these in. You may need to kind of pinch kind of as those threads catch there, but then we'll follow that up also with our flat washer and our nylon lock nut and do that on the other side as well. So again, using our U-bolt here, I'm going to cinch this up, and that's going to really pull this against our U-bolts here. And what we're kind of looking for again is just making sure that this is nice and level, and also that it's pretty well aligned. I can still kind of twist our bracket, as you can see that there. So now's a good chance to make sure that it's nice and aligned exactly how we want it, looking level with the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll tighten up on one side and kind of work my way on the other, and then just kind of go back and forth until we get this nice and tight. And tightening that down is just going to kind of make sure that this sits nice and flat as this squares up against it. So what we can do, again, just like the other time with our U-bolt, is just kind of evenly tighten this down. We'll do a little on each side until we have this snug down as well. So now we'll go ahead and get these tightened down, and we are this should be on the lowest portion possible, meaning that we're really drawing this down. This is against our axle. Everything should be looking pretty squared up here. The bags sometimes can be a little side to side, but nothing major. We don't want anything looking like it's twisted bad. So I'll go ahead and get these tightened down. And you are going to need to put a wrench on the back side here to kind of make sure that these aren't spinning around. Now you're going to want to grab your push connect fitting, and this is going to just tighten into this fitting up top. And what normally we're going for, it's thread lock, and really with brass fittings, tighter is not always better. You don't want this to become a leaking point. So I go ahead and what I do is tighten it with my hands, and then I come back, and what I'm going to do is try to get about 1.5 rotations normally seems to be the ticket, and using a socket here is much better. It's going to be a 9/16 than using an open-ended wrench because your brass is pretty soft. So just kind of keep track of where your line is, and then we'll go ahead and do about a turn and a half. So now at this point, you can go ahead and repeat all the same steps on the passenger side, and it's going to be pretty well identical, except you're going to have a heat shield. So when you put your bag in place on that bracket, this can go right on between or in between that before you tighten it down, and just have this facing towards the little resonator here. And also the way that it bolts up top, you're not removing that nut or clip, but you do have a large bolt that goes through the nut plate, and the nut plate does have a little section there that's kind of raised. That should be facing towards the front, but it is threaded. You just kind of press that in place and then tighten down that bolt. Now that bolt is going to be the same size as the nut that we used on the top fitting, so it should be 1 1/8 inch. So go ahead and get that tightened down, and then once you have both sides, you're ready to start running your air lines. So I'm going to go ahead and get my lines ran, and then I'll show you how I did it all. Now your airline tube comes in a big roll, and what we're going to do is just find the middle part and then cut that. It should be more than enough to be able to run them to each bag from the back. Now when cutting airline tube, it's important you don't use something like snips here. The reason being is it's going to cause a distortion here. You can see that's kind of an almond shape there, which that's not going to work very well in our push connect fittings, and that can cause leaks. So right here I have an airline tubing cutter. Basically just a razor blade that presses on a hard surface. So this is the way that I suggest cutting your airline tube. Make sure that you don't have leaks. Now you can see that's a nice clean square cut. That's kind of what we're looking for. So if you don't have one of these, you can actually use a razor blade on a hard surface, and this is going to allow you to get those nice clean cuts. And chances are if you do have any leaks, it's going to be probably because of that cut. So just make sure it's nice and clean. Now what we'll do is we're going to start with our bracket here, and this just is 2 large zip ties. You can mount it wherever you want. You can put it facing this way. I put it this way, that way you can get a long airline chuck here to be able to, or air chuck to be able to air your bags up, and you'll see you'll have your left and right. So just make sure you keep your lines designated to those bags. And what we'll do here is we're going to get our Schrader valve put on, and it's going to be pretty easy. So we'll go ahead and we'll grab our Schrader valve, and we'll go ahead and take a flat washer and put it on the back end, and then just feed this through. We'll then take another flat washer and put that on there, and then the nut that was on there, we're just going to tighten this down. And if you're not using the bracket, you can also mount this up where your license plate bolts go for a nice clean look, and that can work pretty well. The bracket is included, which is kind of nice for Firestone to include. So we have that mounted up. You can go ahead and tighten that down, but for now this is nice and snug. So now what we're going to do is just push this into the back of the airline fitting, and you see there's a center ring there. You're going to want your tube to just kind of slide over. You should kind of feel it bottom out there, and just give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's actually locked in there. And so it's got teeth that bite into the air fitting. Now if you messed up and you need to get this removed for any reason, you're simply going to kind of just push on the airline tube, hold this collar back, and then you should be able to just kind of get this to pop out. So again, it comes down to making clean cuts here, but we'll go ahead and get this one plugged in. So I've gone ahead and ran my air lines, so we pretty much have our lines installed, and I'll show you how I ran my path. So I've just gone ahead and used some zip ties to attach it to factory wire loom or loom that's already here. That way it stays out of the way of the spare tire. And during this whole process, you're going to want to make sure you're not going to have any sharp edges where this can kind of chafe on or anything like that. Same with the exhaust. You're going to want to make sure that it doesn't get hot and melt the tube. So you can see I've done an extra loop here with our excess, and that's going to be twofold. If you ever plan on doing an air compressor, it's nice to have that extra line already ran. That way you can tie into it. And also doing this loop, if there is any moisture from the compressor when you fill up, it's going to kind of trap that moisture in the bottom of these loops before going into the bags. Now as I pass over here, it is near the exhaust. So the heat sheathing, you're going to want to slide those on to where it's at least near the hot spots, and then we just go ahead and just put this in just like we did our Schrader valves. Just pop that in. On the other side, pretty similar. Shock mounts here, so I just kind of used holes here in the cross member to just kind of keep this away from any moving parts. So I went ahead, put that in. So now we're ready to put some air in our bags. Something else to note, if your wires here are in the way, you're going to want to zip tie that up. There is a hole here on the bracket, but main thing is you should be able to pass your hand all the way around the bag, and that way it's not going to be causing any damage to our wires when raising and lowering. I'm going to go ahead and fill up our bags so we can do a leak check. So go ahead and get your compressed air and start filling these up. Now we want to do a leak check to make sure that we don't have any air that's leaking out. Best way to do that is with a soapy water solution. You're going to want to spray all of your fittings, and you're going to be looking for large bubbles occurring. So spray all your fittings, and you can see the bubbles forming here on this fitting, and what that's going to be is either our cut, or it could also be just having to push this in a little bit more. So first thing, try to push it in. If you do need to recut that to get a better connection, you need to make sure that you don't have air obviously in the bags, otherwise it's going to pop on you pretty quick. So just release the air when you do need to make a new cut. And it could also be the angle here. So you're going to want this to be a straight shot into all your fittings, and that way it's not kinking. That can also cause issues. So same thing, we're going to follow our lines back and double check where we put them into the bags. So we'll go ahead and get these sprayed down as well, and just give it a couple minutes and look for any of those large bubbles forming. Now once you've fixed all your fittings and issues, make sure that it's not leaking. All you really have to do is set the pressure into your bags, whatever you want, and then go ahead, cap up your Schrader valves, and then you're ready to start using your bags. Now, if you are just driving around, you're not going to be loading up, you do want to at least keep 5 psi in the bags, and that way they're not just squished down. Other than that, you're good to start hauling. And that was a look and install of the Firestone Ride-Rite Extreme Duty rear air helper springs on a 2013 Ford F-350 Super Duty.